Hello everyone, my name's Cody Fricke, and today we're going to talk a little bit about sound, and then we're going to go into some recording. We're actually going to do that live, so let's try to get through the sound real quick. Next slide, please. So, what is sound? Well, basically sound is just pressure variations that travel through a medium. So as you can see, we have compressions and rarefactions, or compressions and decompressions. And now, if we go to the next slide, if we follow this basic outline here, all sound travels from a source to a medium to a transducer. Now, if we think about it, this can, as simplistic as this is, it's just completely complex because everything in here can have so many variations that it's just funny how sound can be so complex. Next slide, please. Now, how do we differentiate sound from one another? Well, let's check it out. So all sounds practically go through have four qualities. They have pitch, duration, loudness, and timbre. Now what pitch is how we discern what we would consider an A in Western music from a B in Western music. So if we were to put that into a practical application, it's how you distinguish bum from bum. That's pitch. Now duration. Now this has to do with the length of time that a sound actually travels. So how we can think about this is, say I were to go bum and then bum. So that would be duration. Now loudness, that's how we think about dynamics, which would be loud and soft. So we could have, or we could have. Now the most complex of these four is what we call timbre. Now this is also called tone color. And what this means is this is how I would discern, say, a cello from a piano. And what timbre has to do with is actually overtones. So we have fundamental tones, which is the basic pitch, so how we can tell an A on a piano to an A on a cello, and then we have, of course, have the overtones, which follow mathematic principles, and they sequence, and of course every sound doesn't have the same overtones, and that's how we can distinguish in our ears the difference between instruments. Now I want to get into how we get from me talking to you guys listening, of course. These are called transducers. Now, our ears are transducers, and today, most importantly, the microphones will be our transducers, especially in modern recording. Now, so just to give you a simple demonstration of how this goes, what we have inside of a microphone is two plates that sit parallel to one another. Now, the bottom plate will have an electric charge going through it, and that will create an electromagnetic field between the two plates. Now the sound waves, as you can see in the yellow up there, are hitting that top plate that has the ability of motion, and that will fluctuate the electronic field within those two, and then that will be sent down into the cable and then of course into the system. Now, of course, next slide, which I do believe. So now that we've got it coming into our interface, or something that is able to encode this electricity into sound. Now what that means is we're taking samples, because processing power isn't strong enough to get a complete analogous representation. Analogous just means same. So of course, what that means is we have to take samples, and then we rely on technology to fill in the space. So if we can think about it here, say we have a few samples. If you can look at the very top at A, on the right, we would have an extremely unnatural sound because we have too much space to fill with technology. Now, of course, we have a standard rate in recording is 44.1 kHz. And what that means is they're taking 44,100 samples in 1 second, which is a lot. So that's when we would get something like this. And then, of course, we would be able to have our programming fill in the dots. Now, I'm going to ask my friend Nolan to come up here. We're actually going to do some live recording so that I can show you guys in real time what it looks like for us to get some signal. So here's that real quick. Now, the interesting thing about recording is that it's a lot like art. And we'll just let Nolan record, and then we will get into more of that. So let's just take a listen. And if you guys would like to look at the screen and then kind of in your minds relate what you're hearing to what you're seeing on the screen in terms of if it's soft, you know, we have less signal coming in. So yeah, let's just take a look and we'll let Nolan do his thing.
This is just a train of thought. They're going off the track, and every moment that I thought that I have with you was just in the back of my head. That I'm lying to myself again. These lies, speak the song to my kids. With the heart of my sleep, wipe the tears in your cheek. But the beauty make you fall to your knees. You know the beautiful thing that I see is the one laying right beside you. Was I wrong? Have I been lost alone? The only thing that I know is not me at all. But what I've learned, the only thing that I've learned, this is how my heart breaks. This is how my legs crumble to the floor.
All right, thanks, Nolan. Hate to cut you off. Let's all give Nolan a round of applause. Thank you so much. All right, now we can get into Cubase. Now what Cubase is what we call a DAW, or a digital audio workstation. And this allows us to take signal, and then it practically shows us that signal, and then we can manipulate it. Now I'm not going to get into Cubase because that would take hours. And so let's just start with what we call compression. Now what compression is we are taking our dynamic range, which is loud and soft, and we are compressing it. So we're taking up our lows and we're bringing down our highs. And what this means is that we are going to have a smaller dynamic range and something that's easier. So say I was modernly recording a vocalist, and she was singing all over the place, and then I put her on top of a track and I can't really hear. Well, that's going to take her range and squash it together to make her sound more continuous so that there isn't so much fluctuation and she'll stay on the top. So let's solo our mic, our vocal mic. Of course, there's going to be some bleed on both sides, but let's take a listen to it. Okay, or not.
Every moment that I thought that I had with you was just in the back of my head. Instead I'm lying to myself again. These lies.
Okay, cool. Now, let's look at our compressor. Now, as you can see on the screen, we have a bunch of different things that we can do. We have the threshold, which is the moment or the level of loudness that we hit, and if we hit that certain point, then we're going to start compressing that signal. So if I get over this signal, this is going to bring it down. So say our threshold is 27. So if we hit 27 dB, we're going to start bringing it down. Now, ratio is how much we bring it down. So say that we go above 27 dB. And so how much is our signal going to be brought down? So if a ratio, so for every dB above, and say we're at a ratio to 2, we'll bring it down 2 dB. So, or half a dB, I'm sorry. And so in this ratio, the higher ratio, the more we're going to bring down the signal. So the compressor is just an extremely versatile tool. So let me show you what it looks like when we crank our ratio.
This is just a train of thought. They're going off the track, and every moment that I thought that I had with you was just in the back of my head. Instead I'm lying to myself again. These lies, speak the song to my kids. With the heart of my sleep.
Now, if I were to play it back and I was to turn the compressor off, we're going to have.
This is just a train of thought. They're going off the track, and every moment that I.
Now, so what happens is when we squash this signal, what tends to happen is actually we're lowering the amount of output signal because we're taking down those highs, right? So what do we have to do? It's called makeup gain. So if we really squash something down and we really bring down that, it's going to be necessary for us to actually boost the overall signal that's coming out. So that means we're going to crank up our output gain or makeup gain. So, of course, this is just a way to make it louder. Now, what we have here is called the attack. Now, a compressor obviously is just a tool that we can tell to do about anything. And so what attack means is how fast is our compressor going to start compressing signal? When we hit that threshold, how fast are we going to compress? Well, if we have a fast attack, that means that it's going to have a pretty harsh sound. So say I was to play drums and we have really hard, what we call transients, which as you can see on the screen, if you see all those little peaks, we call those transients. And so if I were to have a compressor act really fast, those transients would be diminished because we'd be actually pulling those down. So sometimes when we compress things, we don't want it to be fast because, of course, we're going to be taking away from the startleness or like the punch of an instrument. So let's move on to EQ real quick. And then after we kind of talk through these things, I'll show you some more advanced things and then we'll do a little more comparison. So if I were to do EQ, it's about to come up. So what we have here is an EQ. Now our standard range of hearing is from 20 hertz to 20K hertz. And so 20 would be the bottom and then 20K would be our highs. Now as you can see up here, or maybe not, it's pretty bright up here, but what you're going to see is something that's more of like a quadratic function. As the time goes along the line, our numbers are going to start getting higher quicker. So we're going to have less of the lower numbers and more of the highs. Because, of course, the way sound works is, say I have 20 hertz, to get an octave above that, we double that number. And then we keep doubling that number, and we keep doubling that number. So that means, of course, that if we were to have a completely equal range between, then it wouldn't really make sense. So let's take a look what happens when we take out our lows. So the 0 is what we call line level. So this is going to be the difference. So this is going to be where we're not doing anything to any signal. So if we go above that, we're going to be boosting that frequency. If we go below that, we will be taking away from that frequency. So let's just say that we do what we call a high-pass filter, which means the highs are going to go through and the low frequencies are going to get cut. And as you can see, as we do this, the shaded area is what we are actually going to be affecting. So I am going to just play this guitar track. So this is what it would sound like if we did not have EQ. Now, say we were to start taking out the lows. Oh, okay, yeah, well, of course, you know, usually it makes sense if you're on the right one. But, so, now that we are actually on the guitar track, let's listen. And I were to start taking out these lows. See, so what we can hear is that we're actually dropping out complete frequency ranges. Now, the power of EQ is that we can make instruments actually sound different than they really do in real life. And so, you know, of course, I could boost that low end and get, you know, a lower sound. Now, to the same token, I can start this over and do it again. So now, if we listen to it again, what if we take out the highs? So it's going to sound really dull because the highs is what we technically consider air, which means it's a more ethereal sound. So when we take those away, we start getting a very unnatural sound. Now what about mid-range? Well, mid-range is obviously the most widely used frequency when it comes to guitars, when it comes to vocals, when it comes to keys. This is going to be the most cluttered range. So actually in modern recording, what we're mostly going to do is mostly to the mid-range, because if not, then our mix or our song is going to sound extremely cluttered. So of course, let's take out the mid-range. So you're going to hear the opposite ends of the spectrum at the same time. Now just to quickly move on to reverb. Just to show you quickly, we will put, what reverb is it's almost like a delay, but it's not technically a delay. And what a delay is an actual harsh second repetition of what you're first hearing. What reverb is a calculated program that will take your signal and then actually make what they call second reflections. So it's almost like a delay, but it's actually not a second delay. There are multiple reflections of the sound to actually imitate what you would hear in a space. So we could pick any verb really, and what we're going to get is this. Yeah. So to yeah.
Hit that little button right there, and you should be good. Nope,
No.
that yellow thing right there. There you go.
Oh, I'm sorry. So pretty much what we're going to get is what we consider a space. So if you can hear, you can actually hear the delay. So what we do is we have to consider the three things that we've talked about. Say I'm a painter and I can consider depth, I can consider the horizontal plane and the vertical plane. And what we consider the vertical plane would be volume, compression, something that has to do with our dynamics. And for the horizontal plane, that's going to be our EQ. That's going to be how we fill the space with frequency, and then depth is actually going to be delays, it's going to be reverbs, and that's going to give us a sense of depth. It's going to give everything sitting somewhere else so that when you're listening to it, you actually don't sound like everything is just coming to you down the center. So let's just put a few effects and see what we can do with modern recording techniques. So when I listen to this, and I'm like, what do you guys think? You think that reverb's too much? You think that's a little overpowering? Yeah, me too. So what we would do, and this is just to show what kind of, or how varied the process is. All recording, there is no standard book or standard procedure. Everything in this is an artistic form that we do, and I really wanted to highlight that because, there's in a society where we've started to move towards something that's extremely set in stone, and this way is the right way. Music continues to be an art form that's extremely expressive and free. And so let's just take this compressor, and I think, personally, the vocals are too quiet. So let's bring up the makeup gain because we've actually compressed the field. And I think that's a little overpowering, so let's go. Yeah, see, so reverb actually also contributes to a dynamic shift based on the fact that they are creating extra signal. And so let's just do something that's not going to actually... And then the guitar. Let's do some EQ. So guitar's frequency range is actually going to be close to, more towards the bottom, maybe around 40 hertz to get those actually like low body tones all the way up to close to around 3K, 4K, 12K would actually be the overtone series. So if we wanted to look for a brighter tone in our guitar, then we would actually boost some of those. So just to show you what EQ would do, say we were to do a boost in the mid-range and then a slight boost to the highs. We're going to get a brighter sound. Now the other thing we have power over is what we call faders, which is basically our most basic way to bring something up and bring something down. Now this means that we are going to mix these two signals together to achieve something that sounds aesthetically pleasing. So just to show you the difference between what's going on now and what was, I'm just going to turn off all of our EQ, all of our compressors, and we will listen back to the signal. So this is what we had. And this is what we have now. All right, so just to wrap everything up, the dimensions of modern recording are just extremely large. And I'm sorry that I had to, of course, shut it down in 20 minutes. So I hope that you can all take away just how complex and all the working parts and the freedom and artistic choice that we can find in music, especially now in modern society. So thank you. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Yeah.
So you have a studio then in the music building?
Yes, we do. So our studio is 3 rooms. It's a control room in the middle, and then we have a larger recording area and a smaller like vocal booth. And we are fortunate to have some extremely good equipment. We have a nice mixing board. We have extremely good microphones. We have lots of what we call post-production effects. And so, yeah, it's definitely a full-functioning studio. Yeah?
So you have 2 microphones, one for vocals and one for the instrument, right?
Yes.
They look different. Are they different? Or?
They are different. So every microphone will be different. They're actually, that's a loaded question. There are lots of different types of microphones. There are dynamic, there are condenser, and there are ribbon. And these are both condensers, which means they need a power supply because they work on that system that we talked about with electromagnetic. And so they are both that type, of course. Now this one has what they call like capsules. This one obviously has a smaller one, and this one has a larger one. So this one actually picks up higher frequencies better, so it drops off the lows. And then the other one is more of like an instrument mic, so it's got more of a line level, a full across the board pickup. So that's why I use that one for the instrument, because the guitar has a much wider range. And then the vocal mic, we don't ever, unless, that's pretty much impossible to go that low. So to actually need a microphone that picks up lower frequencies actually could end up being problematic. So, yeah.
So this is modern recording technique. What would have been maybe ancient or older modern recording technique?
Yeah, so what we call modern is digital audio, which is what we talked about. So we could have gone into, of course, analog, which is with tape. And so what that actually is and why they call it analog is because it's from analog to analog, which means, we're actually taking this electromagnetic signal and putting it on a tape. And so we're actually getting the exact representation because of this magnetic tape. Of course, there's lots of repercussions that come with that. It has a warmer sound, maybe a little more natural sound. There's lots of debate. It's quite the raging thing. And then, we could go back further and further to,
So when we see in a recording studio and they have the whole soundboard in front of them, they're playing with all that stuff, is that essentially what this
that's exactly what this.
allowing you to do?
Yeah, so man, these are all really loaded questions. So they're called inbox and outbox. So this program has the capabilities to do absolutely everything that you see in those massive studios. The fader options are limitless in this program, but people are nostalgic. They like their hands-on experience, and so they will actually, it's more of a controlling board for the program. So what you're actually seeing is somebody controlling this program through that board. So I could digitally just go in there and move all the things with a mouse, but it's just easier, more time-oriented. So yeah, everything that you see in a studio actually is right there. It's just, people are set in their ways. Yeah. Yeah.
What instruments do you play?
So I'm a percussionist. I play lots of instruments because that's what we do. But I also play a little guitar, and that's just about it, personally. So don't ever ask me to sing.
You've got all this technology. Do you modify it?
Well, I don't believe in Melodyne. I'm just kidding. Yeah.
So when you first record the signal,
Mhm.
do you have to know ahead of time what you plan on doing with it? Does that
No,
change
absolutely
when you
not.
record it?
So, microphone technique. Okay, so you can. There's a lot of thought that goes into how you mic something, because if when you get it into the system, you no longer have control of getting that sound back. You've got what you got. You can obviously manipulate that using programs, tools, things like that, but you will never be able to actually change that input signal. So there's an art and a science of acoustics, things like that, that go into recording. Just like this microphone. Say I had a microphone that only picked up like 1 kHz, 12 hertz, and I was singing, it would cut off part of my vocal range, and I'd never be able to get that back. So there's a lot of thought that goes into the microphone. And yeah, so once it's in there, you can do anything with it, but you can never recreate or add, you know, like any original signal to it. Anything else? Yeah.
Professor Cody, so you talked about how different engineers have different approaches and there's no set rule to do things. What are some things that you've done in the studio, say in recording room, that are unique to you that maybe
Okay.
an engineer might not do?
Yeah, something that I've kind of adopted myself is, the reason why I showed you compression and EQ is because they are the standards. And so that's where I start. You know, it's an extremely large process when you've got 20 tracks of different sounds and you have to mix them together. So the best way to start is to get the sounds that you want out of each track before you even set the levels, because when you set the levels, we obviously realize that just by changing the sound changes their dynamic level. And so I start with sound. So I start with EQ and I get them to where I want them, and then I go to compression to make them sit better with each other, and then I move on to actually mixing them and then adding effects that I think would be good, that are more outlandish, I guess you could say. So what you would consider the color of the song. So if you were to listen to something, you'd have, you know, you could always strip away all of the crazy reverbs and things that just make something pop. And so I tend to focus on those last because I find it easier to find something that sounds really good when you have a really solid core to your mix. So that's kind of how I approach things. Anything else? All right. Well, thank you guys so much for coming out. Yeah, enjoy the rest of your day.